I think we can start. Hello, everyone. I'm Varsha, and I'll let Maureen give an introduction in a second, but it's great to be here with you all. I am the CEO and co-founder of Offstream, and we work very closely with industrial biochar producers to help them basically with everything they need to get a project off the ground and operational in a way that helps them generate carbon credits. And then once they're operational, make that part very seamless for them. So we are in the weeds often on documentation related to getting funding and getting government incentives. And so I'm very excited to be here with you today.
Take the baton from you, Varsha. Okay. I'm Maureen Walsh. I am the executive director of the U.S. Biochar Coalition, and we are the U.S. voice for the biochar industry in the United States, very much focused on policy and standards to overlapping and very important activities for the industry to develop. And gratefully, Offstream is one of our phenomenal members. And we're really pleased to be joining you today, Varsha.
Thank you. Um, I can give a quick overview of what we'll cover and then we'll jump right in. This is just going to be structured as a fireside chat, so it'll just be Maureen and I speaking as we often do in person and on Zoom as well. But what we hear a lot from off-stream customers is that especially we meet folks who are interested in developing a biochar project, but are looking for more clarity on like what incentives and policy structures they can tap into, what they need to do at the early stage to align what they're doing with carbon credit expectations, and then often curious but don't always know where to look with respect to local and regional government support. And so we will basically start with and cover a little bit of what we've seen from the pilot stage scaling up, cover some policy items, move into like carbon markets, partnerships, and then we did get a few questions from folks, and I think we can take more. So we'll answer some of those along the way. With that, maybe I'll kick us off on pilot, Maureen, and then we can go from there. Okay, so
Sounds great.
yeah, I mentioned this. So a lot of times at Offstream, we meet producers who are who have kind of the ingredients of a biochar project. So they have access to some feedstock. Often it's in surplus because a local pulp mill shut down, or there's been a lot of recent storms in their region. There's just an oversupply of biomass, and they want to find a way to generate credits from that and generate a new project and a new revenue stream. And pilots are tricky because often the goal is to get something off the ground in as scrappy a way as possible. But what we typically see work really well is if, for lack of a better term, like folks who are interested in this kind of work with what they've got. So there's sort of three pillars of putting together a biochar project. It's identifying your feedstock, identifying the conversion technology, and then figuring out what you're going to do with that product, the biochar, once it's produced. And so in the kindest way, like project operators who just want to do a pilot should just try to find that best version of that triangle as quickly as they can with as little friction as possible to get something off the ground and get a proof of concept. Because as Maureen will touch on later and what we've talked about a lot, it's really hard to scale without showing someone you've started somewhere. So what we see work really well is if folks usually have one of those three pillars on their own, and then they figure out how much money, whether it's $500,000, whether it's 50,000, what they have to allocate towards this, and then pick a piece of equipment based on that. The smaller the project, the quicker it can get off the ground, and then they start producing and then go from there. Do you see anything else like in that space, Maureen? I'm curious, especially with members in the coalition.
Yeah, well, a couple of things. So, we were looking at like incentives that maybe could help
Mm,
some of those smaller projects. A lot of the incentives that come from the federal government side of the coin are really focused on people who are already producing the biochar. For instance, if you have a biochar project that has swung more towards energy and you're producing renewable electricity or renewable fuels. There are some of those projects out there. There are incentives for both an investment tax credit and the production tax credit for those technologies, but you actually have to be producing the the item, right? So, but there are a few kind of tidbits that I want to share with people. There are some smaller opportunities that could be thought of. One of them is if you are focused on a project that is producing renewable energy in an agricultural community, there are what's known as the REAP grants or REAP loan guarantees. The loan guarantee can actually help you build a facility, but they are not looking for pilot facilities. They're looking for large facilities. The grant might be more scaled towards, a smaller producer. There's also a mechanism that one of our board members, Mayo Ryan of CETOS Group, talks about all the time because where he tries to develop his projects are in either distressed or low income communities. And many of these communities can be in rural areas. So there is a program that's administered by the Community Development Financial Institutions Fund. I know that's a mouthful, but it's the CIDFI fund. Um, and it's called the New Market Tax Credit. And it's a 45D tax credit. And what it
mm,
does is it encourages investment in those distressed or low income communities, and it provides, excuse me, a 39% federal tax credit over 7 years. So it's 5% annually for the first 3 years, and then six for the next four. And they look for projects like, business expansion, creating rural jobs, economic development, and certainly and biochar facilities can fit into that bucket. And he in particular has had pretty decent success in using that vehicle. But the majority of the federal incentives are really geared towards people who are producing. What I would suggest is, how you looked at your triangle, right, for getting off the ground. I'm going to insert a couple things at the bottom of the triangle, right? And the two things that I would insert, and I gave you the speech before, it's called doing your homework. You really should be doing research into what states have programs to spur economic development, and what states are perhaps dealing with wildfire problems or dealing with biogenic feedstocks that they're having a really difficult time recycling. There's something that's driving a lot of states and driving the federal government right now, and that is PFAS contamination. And so one of the things that destroys PFAS is pyrolysis. And so that could be, conceivably at a near a wastewater treatment facility because they have to do something with their biosolids. Or it could also be perhaps in a more rural area where they might have anaerobic digesters or a lot of farms that have manure and they need to treat that manure before it can be land applied because they're finding PFAS and manure there as well. So it's really doing a heck of a lot of research here on where you're siting your facility, and it's not just, preventing NIMBYism too, right? Like you don't want to get run out of town. If a town doesn't want you, if a location doesn't want you, you don't want to get on the wrong side of those neighbors because they will just come
mm,
after you. We've seen some pretty well financed and successful projects just get beaten to death by the NIMBYism. You want to find people that want you to come there to take care of a problem and that help you develop a solution set. And hopefully they can not only provide a welcome to you, but they can also provide some incentives to you to be there and to be growing your company, employing local people, you know, investing in that local economy. And that should be a part of the base of your triangle to ensure that a successful project.
Thank you for building on my framework. I appreciate that. I guess I'm curious. I know a couple Offstream customers actually have used the new market tax credit, although I'm not as close to the mechanics of it. Is there a minimum size that makes that interesting, or does it not matter like the size or dollar amount that the project is
I
for?
would love to say that I know that
Yeah.
answer. I do not, but you know, the projects that CETOS has used this for, you know, are mostly agriculturally based. So I can't imagine that they're ginormous projects. You know, they may be in the millions of dollars simply because pyrolysis is not a cheap technology, and
Right.
you know, but I can't, you know, I hundreds of thousands or hundreds of millions of dollars, doubtful, right? I would
Okay.
imagine it's more towards the, you know, the somewhere between, you know, 5 to 25 million, but I am literally just spitballing here, just on the
Okay.
experience of Mayo having used it.
Yeah. Okay. I know the folks that we know who used it. Um, it was on the bigger side, probably 20-30 million dollar project, but probably worth defining actually like scale and pilot. So I know I talked about a pilot project. Obviously, a pilot project just means it's the first project you're doing. It can be any size, but there's sort of a natural there's sort of a natural like bifurcation in terms of equipment that we see in biochar. So whether it's pyrolysis or gasification or like an adjusted, oh, thanks, Mayo. Mayo stated that the fees are very expensive, so the larger the allocation request, the better. Oh, look at that, 25 million. Thanks, Deirdre.
Okay, there we go. I'm glad that he's joined us. Thank you, Mayo.
Yeah. Okay, so there's like a natural bifurcation just based on the equipment one is using, how many pieces of that equipment you need, how much biomass you have access to. And so, we see definitely much smaller scale units that are maybe 40 for 50,000 up to $200,000 that could probably produce a few hundred like tons of biochar from maybe 1,000 tons of dry biomass a year. And that's a really small pilot. Another model we see would be kind of a small scale rotary kiln. So instead of going for something that can process like 50 tons a day, going for something that could process 10 tons a day of biomass. And so, there's definitely like the pilot project, what it often looks like, what we see is that folks do have an aspiration of how big they want to be and they scale it back. They pick kind of the closest technology at the smallest scale where they get to de-risk the most important things. Like, how do I process this feedstock? Can I prove out my physical supply chain and move this forward such that I can scale this model, whether it's adding 6 more lines, of the same piece of equipment, or, honestly, that's usually what it is, right? Or kind of getting a scaled up version of that. But everything changes equipment by equipment. So um, the pilot projects, I guess, that we see do really well, sort of decide like what's their aspiration, like where do they eventually want to be from a scale perspective, and that question is answered by a combination of how much biomass they have available and what is their aspiration, like what is their personal aspiration. Do you want to build a very large operation, or do you want to make something that works in your very specific context and just keep that going? And so so stepping back, the successful projects that we work with, we often see kind of pick that aspiration and then try to keep the equipment consistent and the biomass consistent and just get the smallest version of that triangle such that they can then replicate it. And depending on what equipment is used and what technology they go for, but let's say you're working with like a biomass energy techniques rotary kiln, which a lot of our customers do, you could order a smaller sized one. You could even buy it on the secondary market because a lot of folks that are scaling up are selling them.
Yep.
Get that within a few months, get it operational, let's call it within 6, get a carbon credit, like get the biochar produced, stored in the ground, generate a small set of credits. And so within 12 months, with I think generous buffer, get to a place where projects are generating a small amount of cash and then use that and make go no go. Like, do you want to scale up or not? So that's a common pathway we're seeing. And I would say that the industry right now, from a carbon credit sales perspective, really does, it's just the same as the government, reward people who are actually doing things versus not. Um, there's a there is a inevitability, I think, that a credit buyer perceives when you have a project in the ground producing biochar. And without that, it can, I think it's especially because biochar is a very popular carbon removal pathway, like projects are just going to get passed over for ones that do have something that they can show. And many kind of surrounded at what we often see is how this comes up is when you're submitting a response to a proposal request for credits, the off-taker, the carbon credit buyer will ask, like, how many hours has your equipment operated, period. And it's kind of hard to lie in answering that question. It's either zero or a number that's non-zero. And I think a large number of folks are in the zero bucket. So it's a really good way to differentiate yourself. Yeah, but Mayo, thank you for that information on the new market tax credits. And hopefully this definition of pilots was helpful. So anything else you wanted to add, Maureen, that I might have cut you off of, or do you feel satisfied on the topic?
No. I mean, from the policy perspective, I think
Yeah.
the biggest thing that the takeaways are, um, most of the federal incentives are focused around people that are actually producing, just like they are on the on the carbon credit side, because you're not getting a credit unless you actually have a product, right?
Right.
No ticky, no shirty, so to speak. No credit for no carbon, no credit. And then, just there, municipalities and localities, counties, states are doing some interesting stuff. And
Okay.
so it really behooves you as much as you can if there is an opportunity of like, well, where are we going to place this, right? To do the research. I'll throw out a good example. So Florida, stuff grows year round in Florida, right? It's not like Virginia where, the snow on the ground precludes yard work. I guess you could have a snow shoveling business too, but Florida, landscaping is huge and it is in perpetual growth mode. And so they have an inordinate amount of green green waste that they need to deal with. And a lot of the landfills are reaching their maximum capacity to accept more waste. And so they're really trying to be smart about diversification. Miami-Dade County has formed a couple of partnerships with biochar companies who are situating themselves at the landfill, and they are diverting the green waste into the biochar facility, and making really phenomenal, like, good produce of the biochar, and they're getting an incentive to be there, right? So it's looking for those partnerships. It's going to take some time and energy, but hopefully it would pay out in the end to do so.
Definitely. We see a version of that. I mean, I think Pete, I saw you were on this call, like in Colorado, California, of course, with wildfire management, like local fire districts have specific goals around collecting biomass and grants and funding allocated towards getting rid of it. And, sometimes people will come to me and they'll say, hey, I'm getting access to this grant, but the place where they want me to put the biochar is not eligible for carbon credits. Should I still do it? And I usually say yes, because there's still so much benefit. If you think about kind of this like supply chain of sourcing biomass, moving it, processing it, putting it somewhere, the learnings from all those parts of the process are still very strong and can then be applied to another project, or maybe that end use can change once the grant pans out. And so it's like, I definitely as a person have a bias for action, but I think the whole incentive structure today does as well. And uh and I think that's a recipe for success as well. So yeah, I was we definitely have seen some growth in Florida as well, but anywhere where there's biomass there's sort of a heat map image. I think we could potentially find it that shows a lot along the West Coast and a little bit in the mountain region, and then in the Southeast, it's just it's a big problem. So
Yeah,
yeah,
and it all depends upon the type of biomass too, right? Like
right.
if we're in Iowa, the biomass we're going to be talking about maybe is corn stover, but it's still stuff that
Hmm.
gums up your works, gets stuck in your drainage, and and may be more of a problem than it is a benefit. And what are you going to do with it? I mean, sure,
Right.
you can collect it, and many people do mix it into the feedstock for cattle, but for a lot of folks, it's just a biogenic waste source that they have to manage. And meanwhile, a lot of the soils in Iowa or the Midwest in general have become degraded after, years of utilizing synthetic fertilizer. And so there's a desire to have more sustainable practices, both state and federal, right? So it all depends upon the thing that you were saying about biochar before, its bespokeness.
Mm.
It's bespoke through the whole food chain, right? It's bespoke on what biomass are you taking in, what's your secret sauce inside of your chamber of your biochar production facility,
Mm.
and then in the end you're making a bespoke product that one company may be looking to utilize a different bespoke product to lower their greenhouse gas emissions from concrete, and
Mhm.
there's going to be somebody else who's looking to it to increase their carbon content in their soils in Iowa, right? So it's the whole technology and the process is very geared to being able to swing the system to do what you want it to do, which is
Definitely. Yeah,
fascinating and frustrating.
exactly. It has pros and cons. I often say, I'm sure folks have heard this, but I compare it to solar and this idea that, what has made solar very financeable is how cookie cutter it can, at least on paper. Obviously, I know siting is tricky, and I know there are like differences with the local environment, but on the whole, like the technology of photovoltaic solar is pretty consistent. It's one feedstock, the sun, and then it gets pushed typically to the grid. So it
Yep.
has way fewer variables. And I think as folks in bioenergy, often, like biomass power plants or any biomass conversion that produces energy is in that renewable energy. We're in that renewable energy conversation, but what can make it harder to secure financing is this, like, every project in biochar is a first of its kind, sort of. And investors want to see, typically on like the private equity front, a project 2.0, not a 1.0. But I am starting to see some technology providers in that chamber part of your analogy become consistent and trusted. But as you said, it's like very dependent on the biomass, its moisture content and properties, and where the biochar is going and how well it gets incorporated into that, whether it's a building material or cement or fertilizer. So
I mean,
yeah,
I think what we're going to probably see as this industry develops, and this is something that, the USBC is really involved in, is
yeah,
kind of what we would consider standards
mm,
for the various different pillars of the biochar, right? And we're developing a set of standards for production for the basically biomass in
right. This
biogenic
fall.
feedstock in, right? The production here, like time, temperature, pressure, chemical content, and then the output, right? So we're not completely just focused on that production box, because we talk about the feedstock, and we talk about the output.
Yep.
But I would not be surprised if we really start to see, best practices develop for the certain silos of the various different industries that we're going to be servicing, right? Where if you're putting this biochar into a mine and utilizing it for, remediation, or just keeping the mine from emitting any type of thing, it's going to be a really probably different char than it's going to be for agricultural purposes, or for replacing coke and steel making, or for, you know, high tech battery manufacturing. But I would imagine that there'll be similarities in in those applications, right? And I'm hopeful that we'll start to see kind of like um, best practices develop into basically standards themselves. I'm not saying you'll be able to take like something off the
Mhm.
shelf and say, okay, I want to make this type of biochar for this type of purpose, and I have this type of biomass, but hopefully it won't be that far off, right? It
Yeah,
could be, I've got this,
that would be a dream.
yeah, I've
Yeah,
got this input,
yeah,
I've got this process. Tell me what I can make with it and where it needs to go.
yeah. I think that the work that USBC y'all are doing and also some of the end product physical quality standards will go really nicely, that USBI is doing will go really nicely together. So
Yep.
yeah, a lot of I don't want to get too sidetracked because I know we prepped some other points, but a lot of what
Yep.
we see folks, I know there were a couple folks on folks who had questions on financing and like what are the options, but a big part of what makes a project financeable is having both like a physical product revenue stream plus a carbon credit, ideally two, if not three. Maybe you're getting a tipping fee as well for the feedstock you're using. So the work you're all doing about making it easier to understand what is biochar production, and then also how do you know that the product is good, that the USBI standard work, I think will really help on the physical product offtake side. So yeah, I'm very
Agreed.
excited. Um, I have some questions for you about some other incentive programs. So I know we talk a lot about NRCS 336. I think you've been working on tech neutral 45Q. I mean, what is it like the realistic lay of the land that you're seeing right now, Maureen, about conservation and energy programs at the federal level?
Well, oddly enough, even in a partial government shutdown, I think I have some good news to share. So the USDA was fully funded in November during the last really long government shutdown, and so the programs that a lot of biochar producers are engaged with, whether it be the environmental quality incentives program, which is the 336 soil carbon amendment standard. Those programs are going to be ongoing. We've had, I think, successful meetings with the new leadership at USDA, and so their whole framework is basically like a farmers first. Farmers really do want to be utilizing programs that can help um, improve their soils and reduce the need for irrigation, reduce
Mhm.
the need for additional fertilizers. So they are definitely using the equip program. All of this depends upon the region that you're in because it's all a very regional focus, but the payment rates can be about $200 per acre for
Mhm.
100% biochar applications, and it decreases with blending with other substrates like compost, which is probably a best practice to get the most out of your biochar and compost. There's regional programs. There's the Regional Conservation Partnership Program, and that's more of kind of like larger scale biochar initiatives that have multiple producers. So that that can fit a cluster. There's the Conservation Stewardship Program. That is much more focused on biochar production from woody residue. It can be on farm woody residue or from forest thinnings, or you're replacing an orchard. And so there's some opportunities there. If you're swinging your program or your production more towards energy output, and there are some biochar producers that do that, the REAP program over at the rural energy area, they have some grants and loan guarantees. And then there's the conservation innovation grants. So, there's opportunities there that are already existing. Those have
Mhm.
been renewed, right? They're not going away. They're not shutting down because of any shenanigans going on in Congress. I would say there are two big things to lean into that we're seeing policy wise that could really be helpful to biochar producers. The first one is legislation that's already passed the House. It's over in the Senate Ag Committee. and that is what's called Fix Our Forest. We talked about it when I saw you last fall.
That feels
Um,
like yesterday, but yeah,
Yep.
it's a
Well,
little
we're
bit.
we're gearing up for our March
Yeah.
fly-in, the 23rd through 25th. I'm hoping you're going to be coming and joining us. So that did get into the Senate Ag Committee. They did vote it out in a bipartisan fashion, and we are trying to get them to move it to the floor.
Okay.
And that would really help people that are utilizing forest residuals, right? So it's the whole idea is let's get the tinder out of the forest and put it to work for America. The thing that I'm really excited about is that we actually have a bill that's been introduced in the Senate right now. We're hoping to get introduction in the House, and this would bring the 45Q tax credit up to tech neutral language,
Hmm.
meaning that biochar and other sequestration technologies like vaulting would qualify, utilizing technology at the end of a gas line to crack off the CO2, and then you have a pure methane blend. So all of those
Hmm.
technologies would be incentivized because the language would no longer be saying, oh, CCS and DAC you qualify. It
Right.
would just basically say what the investment tax credit and for fuels and electricity says now. We want you to make renewable electricity. We want you to make renewable fuels. Here's the guidelines, fit within the guidelines, and you qualify. So, been introduced in the Senate by two really good members, Tim Sheehy from Montana and Marie Cantwell from Washington. Sheehy's pretty new, but he's really bullish on this. Um, Cantwell's an old hand at getting energy tax credits passed. You know, these things don't pass on their own, right? We don't wave a magic wand. Go watch Schoolhouse Rock, right? It's got a lot of work to do. It has to
Mhm.
pass both bodies. It has to be conferenced. It has to be signed into law. And then we have to get moving on its implementation because sometimes it gets over to the agency and they don't do exactly what we really wanted them to do. So we're going to have to
Surely. Yeah.
lay down a lot of work beforehand. But that those are two things that could be really, really, really helpful to biochar.
Yeah. So if you had to, I guess if we were to split these various programs up into things that exist today versus things that could exist in the future, is it fair to say EQIP NRCS 336 that exists today, but still like a little bit tricky because it's so regional to tap into? And then regional conservation partnerships, new market tax credits, that's all in the first bucket. And then tech neutral 45Q and fix our forest acts that those I guess are in different timings, but both in the future bucket.
Right. Well, one's an existing program that already has been passed into law and has authority to operate and receives funds from the federal government, and the other two are prospective, right? We're very hopeful that they're to come, but I will tell you, neutralizing the tax credits within the
Yeah,
IRA literally took the better portion of 10 years, right? And it was
right.
like
The ITCs, you mean?
yes, the
Yeah,
ITC and the
right.
PTCs, right?
Yeah.
Before they named all the technologies, right? Like if you had a new technology that was generating renewable electricity or was making a new fuel, you had to run and somehow jam it into like a tax extender or whatever, and
Yeah.
it was a mess. And
Yeah.
so Ron Wyden from Oregon was has been on the finance committee for a very long time. He was chair for a long time, and he realized like this is driving people crazy. Why don't we just avoid this by future proofing it and using that tech neutral language? Say what you wanted to do. You wanted to capture carbon and either
Right.
store it or beneficially reuse it. Stop naming the technologies. Say what you wanted to do, and let the US compete like we always do, right? We're
Yes.
very good at innovating, we're very good at competing and unleash unleash the innovation of US technology to solve the problem.
Yeah. It's a very American approach. I'm really happy we landed on it. If you had to say, when is the soonest that a biochar producer could expect to see them actually like tap into some of the incentives in FOFA, fix our forests, or tech neutral 45Q? Is it 6 months? Is it 12 months? Is it 24? Like obviously, if everything went perfectly, what's the soonest possible? Like,
Well, if everything went perfectly, FOFA is far, far along compared
okay,
to 45Q. 45Q has been introduced by one chamber. We don't even have an introduction in the House, right?
Yeah,
Now, there
fair.
are plenty of times where the House takes a Senate bill and passes it, but not something like this, right? It's something much larger. For instance, the ultimate bill, the BBBA that was passed, the Big Beautiful Bill Act, the big bill that was passed in the House and Senate
Sorry.
this year. That
Yeah.
actually, so there was a House version and the Senate was like choking on it. So they passed their own version and kicked it back to the House. So stuff like that happens,
Okay.
right? But the schoolhouse rock, Varsha, is, I know I'm a little older than you, so
No, I watched that in elementary school.
okay, good. All right.
Yeah.
So bills move through both chambers, right?
Yeah.
And many times they're the exact same bill that's introduced in each chamber, but
Right.
they are different bodies and they have different environments and different fingerprints are left on the bill. So sometimes it's the exact same bill, but other times you have to marry them in a conference, and then the conferenced piece of legislation has to be voted on by both bodies again, and then it
Hmm.
goes to the president to sign. So FOFA has already passed the House. Okay, they're done with their version. The Senate version came out of committee. It when a bill is introduced, it goes to committee, and the committee says yay, nay, or dust draws it. Right?
Right.
They said yay, and they passed it out in a bipartisan fashion, which is key because for it to pass on the Senate floor, it
Yeah.
has to be able to muster 60 votes
Right.
to cut off debate. All right. So that's the filibuster, right? So 60 votes, Republicans have 50. So they need to bring 10 Democrats along who are willing to do it. And if they've seen that it came out bipartisan fashion out of the committee, they're probably much more likely to vote for it on the Senate
Yeah.
floor. So once this passes the Senate, that's the next step. When you come in March, we are going to be talking to senators like, get it together, men and ladies. Get it on the floor. Vote it. It's a
Yeah.
it's a bipartisan piece of legislation. It can be a win
Okay.
for everybody. And then it needs to be conferenced because the Senate version is slightly different than the House version,
Hmm.
repassed, and then it goes to the president for signature, and then it is up to the agency to implement. So it's going to go to USDA, and then it's going to have to
Yeah.
go through a whole regulatory process. So one of the things we're doing during this fly-in is we're starting to meet with senior advisors over at the U.S. Forest Service because we
Okay.
want them to know who we are and what biochar can do and why Section 301 is so important and how they can really gas it up to be focused on building projects, not
Yeah.
science. Science is great, not
Right.
research
Right. We
and
talked
development,
about like
deployment.
the scale up versus R&D.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. I definitely remember. Okay. That's very helpful from a timeline perspective. So it's definitely many
40
months out, but
45Q is a way off. Now, I
yeah.
can tell you that sometimes lightning strikes and strange things happen, right? Like,
Sure.
usually there's some mechanism every other year. It's not going to happen this year simply because the BBBA already happened and kind of the air's been taken out of the room on tax. But there's a lot of other taxes that the incentives run out,
Mhm.
and there's a rush to extend them. And if that happens, we certainly will be arguing to be in the mix. That's an opportunity, right? To say, okay, you're extending these, let's amend this. And there's always like perennially, I want to say maybe about every 5 years, there's a big tax bill that comes along because many times they just say, all right, there's been stuff that's been floating around, we need to deal with it, and we're just going to package it all together, and we're gonna try to get it through. These Congresses have been difficult to do that, so that stereotypically they've done it when there's been one party control, and
Right.
they've used the Budget Reconciliation Act to pass it through on one party control. Um, Many times that ends up happening in a midterm, or sometimes that ends up happening when you elect a president. Like we've seen it since 1992. You elect a president, and he comes in with a new Congress, and it's all Democrats or it's all Republicans, and they're able to do something that's much more ambitious. And so that happened with the IRA under Biden. It
Right.
happened with Trump under both his first and second terms.
Mhm.
It happened with Obama and the recovery bill. It happened with Obama in the healthcare bill that passed, Obamacare. Those
Mhm.
were all packages that moved under
Yeah.
one party control.
I loved that. Thank you for the quick history
History
refresher.
lesson. Sorry, yeah, I'm a history nerd
Yeah,
over
I
here.
loved it. No, no, I think it's helpful to just be realistic when I know a lot of our audience is also probably trying to, like, if you're raising external capital, having a sober view on these incentives is important. So,
Yeah. The credits
yeah,
that exist right now are your renewable electricity, your renewable fuels credit, and biochar. If your goal is to be making biochar, that's where you're putting your energy, right? So those credits don't seem
right.
overall to be all that enticing towards biochar producers, but some of them do use them. We've had
Yeah,
some in
right,
our organization. So, and also, look, if you're a smaller scale, look to the REAP grants. If you're bigger scale, maybe the REAP loan guarantee, or as Mayo pointed out, maybe the new market tax credit is also a possibility.
right,
So there are things that
yeah,
exist, but the big kahuna is really that 45Q, right?
right.
Like, because the thing is, if you don't even have, you're not making any money, right? So you don't have a credit.
Don't remind us, Maureen. Yeah,
Well, then
I
then
know,
you
I
have
know.
then you have the
Well,
tax equity
yeah,
equities market, and you
yeah,
go and you get paired up with somebody who needs that. It's
yes,
not going to be the full credit amount. You'll have a discount, but it's
yeah.
money in your pocket.
Definitely. Well, as you're talking about these credits and then also just the time horizon for them to, like, even if you were operating today, the way the credit works is you need to operate, make money, produce biochar, produce energy, then apply for the tax credit and then receive it unless you're doing a tax equity partnership, like you said. And so my wheels are a little bit turning, and I've always known this, but it's connected the dots actually live for me why so many folks we work with are prioritizing carbon credits first as their first like credit revenue stream. And the reason is that it's far fewer steps, still steps required, but far fewer steps to start to tap into those. And we obviously believe at Offstream, we believe in like I we believe that there will be some version of a carbon credit, but we're not attached to this like voluntary carbon market in its current version forever. I think it's here right now, it serves a purpose right now. It helps early stage projects get cash in the door within, you know, the shortest possible. We're starting to see with speedy registries is like 3 months after commissioning, which is a very, very, very fast timeline, but a bit, still aggressive, or within certainly like 6 to 9 months if you're going for a larger transaction. And so the way I'm starting to think about these more actually is it basically just a bridge and a continued revenue stream, recognizing that the carbon credit like market may continue to evolve, but it probably bridges us to a point where we do hit some of these milestones you're talking about, a tech neutral 45Q, even a compliance carbon market focused on biomass, particularly, like, one can dream. And that is potentially is a very natural way things might evolve, basically, without
Yeah,
any,
and
yeah,
one of the things we're seeing, Varsha, is that because we talked about some of the other renewable energy, renewable recycling out there, right? Like solar, wind, geothermal, hydro, uh, folks that are recycling biogenic feedstock other than
right,
to biochar and digesters, composting, right? So these industries have been a verifiable like industry for longer, far longer than biochar it has. Like biochar is much more nascent. Part of what we do, you've seen this, part of what we do when we go into every meeting is ensure that they actually understand what the heck biochar is and
yeah,
what the process is, right? And gratefully, most of these meetings that we have now, people do know. So there's been a lot of education, there's been a lot of uptick in understanding what the industry is. But the industry is growing, maturing, and evolving. And one of the things that I think is going to be a huge boon is that there are much larger Fortune 500 companies that are looking to satisfy their scope one and scope two requirements, and they are looking for the right technologies to be able to do so. Biochar in many ways is a better bargain for them than some of those other renewable technologies, When you look at us from an LCA, many times we're a negative technology, right? And so
Yeah.
that adds to their book. But one of the problems that we're seeing is that a lot of these other technologies are already vetted with significant information, data sets, et cetera, in these registries that they're using. Like, for instance, I'm not sure if you've heard of these people,
Invent.
Event, yeah, in
Yeah, the
Switzerland,
life
right?
cycle assessment emissions factor database.
Yeah,
Yep.
exactly. So they are working with a couple of folks right now to try to load data sets about
Right.
biochar into their registries so that they can better evaluate it. And it's not just, a wing and a prayer, it's verifiable. We're able to show through MRV and really good standards that what we're producing is valid. It's
Mhm.
monitored, it's recorded. And then those companies, those big players, right? We're Procter
Right.
and Gamble's and Shell's, and they can be starting to move into the biochar space. And once that pivot starts to happen, then
Right.
I think you're going to see a lot more in investment in the the large scale commercialization of biochar. So
Right.
to answer your question, yes, I do think, the current carbon markets are probably your foot in the door. They're carbohydrates on your plate. And the eco invents of the world are going to be your proteins, because those are going to be the people that are like wrestling down, the moose, the bison, whatever, but they're going to be putting protein on your
Sure.
plate and really injecting, I think, a lot more energy, professionalism, scale into the biochar industry.
Yeah, definitely. And I know Jeff Hallowell, he's on right now. I know he's leading a lot of the work around eco invent. And the way I've always thought about the value of that is these emissions factor databases are essentially tools that like big corporations lean into to say, okay, if this is my current process, if I remove this piece of fertilizer and plug in biochar instead, what's the carbon footprint of it? And there's no stable data on that today.
That's
Um,
where that information
and
came
that's
from. So I'm
exactly,
I'm going to
yeah,
give a shout out to Jeff as well. We had a
yeah,
conversation
a
with him
double
yesterday. I
shout
was like,
out for you today.
that's brilliant.
Yeah,
I
I
was
know,
like,
I
yeah,
know. Um, I know we had a couple of questions come in around carbon credits. So if you're okay, Maria, maybe I'll just tackle them at a high level. And then if you have follow-ups, we can cover them. I know we're kind of close
sure.
to our final 10 minutes here. Is that okay?
No problem. Sounds like a
Okay.
plan.
So I know we had a question around how carbon credits pricing varies across protocols and end use applications. So I might weave that into just like I'll give a 2-second summary of carbon credits and quality, but essentially, I think for a lot of early stage biochar producers and folks who are still waiting to get a physical biochar offtake, their first predictable revenue stream is often carbon removal credits. And we're in a really interesting period in the carbon markets broadly, where biochar carbon removal is sort of in the sweet spot of demand because credit buyers want to buy something that counts as removal because they see the market trending towards removal versus avoidance, but they also don't want to spend like $1,000 per metric ton of carbon removed, and they really want to insure against delivery risk. So for a lot of, for example, I think um, around 500,000 tons or so of carbon removal credits were retired last year, but there were it was like 70x the amount of offtake signed. And of those offtakes, a large number of them were bioenergy with CCS projects. And that's great because they can scale, but the risk that stops a lot of folks from signing an offtake with like a BEX developer, bioenergy with CCS, is so many projects will just never get off the ground. And so biochar is really in that sweet spot of you can go from idea to operating in 12 months, if not sooner. You can start to generate cash. You can get out, you can kind of prove it out. And so when we look at what buyers look for in carbon credits, it's essentially projects that are collecting really core operational data. They know everything about their supply chain on the front end. So where did their feedstock come from? Or were the properties of it? How much was used? all the energy used in that chamber, as Maureen mentioned, basically the core process, and then where it went. And so what we spend a lot of time on with producers is as they're designing their project, designing it such that it's flexible kind of across standards so that they can get credits. So we know different standards have little nuances in the way, when I say standard, I mean like isometric versus climate action reserve versus Puro. Each of them has tiny nuances, but our approach is you should develop your project in a way that you're getting as much data as possible up front and at least know what you'll need to track downstream so that when you want to turn on the credit revenue stream, you can. And a lot of the data I know in the standard developed from USBC on production lines up to that. So it's definitely within the core process, like the same data that you need to just operate day to day is the same data registries and standards bodies want to need. I think where it diverges is on the ends of the value chain. So it's not mission critical for a biochar producer to know where all their product goes in the soil just to live day to day, but versions of that are needed for carbon credits. And so just deciding up front before you start selling and distributing which path you want to take is pretty important, basically.
Yeah. And that was quite purposeful
Yes,
on
yes.
USBC's behalf. We wanted it to mesh with with those carbon credit markets that already existed and the platforms that they were using. And quite frankly, we wanted some of the real forerunners of some of the strongest MRV to be in
Mm-hmm.
those discussions too. So, the two founders of Kula have been working with the USBC for some time, right? So we're we're purposely trying to make less work for folks that are engaging in the biochar space, and hopefully they're getting value from that carbon credit, and they're meeting a very high level of production standard at the same time.
Yeah, I know we chimed in on a lot of the MRV requirements as well. I think there's sort of especially in the US, there's like a nuance that we struggle and have, I think, succeeded with respect to what do standards want to see, because they'll ask for every piece of data if they can versus what's practical.
Right.
Um, and with respect to like feedstock and sustainability, there's a whole, I could go down a rabbit hole, I won't, regarding the types of standards and traceability that exist here versus internationally. But more and more, we're starting to see um, standards recognize that there's a lot of biomass and capital here in America that's worth them I guess like playing ball with, for lack of a better term. So
Yeah.
yeah. Um I think our last topic we were going to touch on quickly is just as with respect to partnerships. So I guess we touched on this a little bit with Miami-Dade, Maureen, but is there anything else that comes to mind as a best in class example of like folks having great municipal or regional partnerships?
Oh gosh. Well, I mean, it really runs a gamut, right? Like there's some people that have done a good job of establishing themselves as a partner to their county, to their city, etc., and others that have gotten bit. I mean, Mayo's on this call. His first project was at Regen Monterey, right, where they were taking their green waste, their wood waste, and utilizing it in their facility. Um, there's another example that I think we haven't really talked about, where it's not just partnerships with cities and states, but we're seeing a lot of integration in agricultural capacities, right? So instead of having to truck in your pistachio shells, your almond shells, or your almond wood waste, etc., you're actually building a facility in the same location as the almond farm or the pistachio farm, or you're building it in a regional area where you can receive those feedstocks. So, those are just some examples of what some people have done. But it again, it depends upon, for instance, Miami, big difference between Miami as a Miami-Dade County
Hmm.
and Florida as a state, right? Miami-Dade County is managing their own regional landfill and realizing, oh my gosh, we're running out of
Right.
space. We need to figure out a practical solution for this. And Florida as a state may not be as engaged in what is considered, upcycling, recycling, renewable energy in general. So do that homework, do your research. We've got the power of IA and our AI in our hands, right? So the research gratefully has lessened. We still need to double check our work and make sure that it's all relevant, but it's hopefully the power is in our hands to find regions, cities and counties, states that are focused on utilizing new technologies to be able to solve their problems. Virginia's an example. We have a new governor who
Yeah.
recognizes we've got a real big investment in Virginia with data centers. We
Hmm.
need power. We need a massive amount of power in Virginia.
Right.
And so they're trying to figure out like how can we square the circle with generating more power without taxing our grid, without passing it on to our ratepayers, and how can we do it in a way that is as sustainable as possible. So, start doing that research, find where those opportunities are. The other thing I would say is, um, organizations like the USBC we're set up because we are trying to be as much of a networking capability of information and people, right? So we were founded on mostly focusing on federal policy. There are
Hmm.
a couple of discrete states that we're focused in on, but we're a member-driven organization. And so, Varsha comes on knocking on the door and says, "Hey, I think I have an opportunity here in Colorado. The governor is looking for X, Y, and Z. Can we put a proposal together? Can we, put a meeting on the books?" That's what we do. We had a member essentially doing that in Maryland, and he was actually able to get legislation introduced into this session that would establish a CDR program, including 3 grants. And so, it's not insurmountable, but it's driven by our membership. So I would encourage you, if there's areas that you guys want to get engaged in, if there's particular policies that you think we could band together in and really advance the industry, that the USBC is at your service to do so.
Thank you for, yeah, I would say I've seen it firsthand and will second what Maureen said. I think the organization is, I think the industry has really needed what USBC is doing, and just in, I think I shared on a podcast like a year and a half ago that one of my goals was that a year from then, everyone in the country would know what biochar is, and it's definitely close. I know a lot more people who know what it is. So, that's part of it too, just creating awareness.
Beating the drum. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. And going back to your point on the partnerships, all of the work that like producers do in developing local partnerships, we really see factor into their success in the carbon markets, because for most producers, they're generating credits. They want to sell some spot, meaning they sell them after they've issued them. But for the majority of folks, they really want a multi-year offtake to purchase those credits upon delivery. And a big part of that offtake negotiation and diligence process is that buyer who's signing the offtake asking, how likely is it that this project is going to be around in 10 years? If they say they're going to sell me credits, I really want to make sure that they will be there generating them. Are they going to run into local headwinds, and or is there some policy that's going to really limit them from operating, and then we have to go run this process this whole year process again? And so a project that has really tight connections with the local government, but also has proven just even at the city level, like stakeholder management, and there's good incentive alignment locally, is likely going to perform a lot better. And there's a baseline, but then there's also basically how you exceed that baseline. So maybe my biggest summary of this whole this whole conversation from my end is that, a lot of folks are like, oh, there's all these different incentives and standards out there. Like, what do I need to do for each of them? Of course, there's like very specific compliance reporting. And my gentle plug is that that's what we help people do is take their core project and feed into the standards well, whether it's calling it DMRV for carbon registry or it's just like a certification or documentation to submit to a buyer. It's kind of the same core data. But the criteria that the government's looking for, that carbon credit buyers are looking for, that financing groups are looking for is pretty much the same. They want to see projects with diversified revenue streams that have a system that works, that they've proven. And so that's what
Everybody's looking for predictability,
yeah,
right? Like
exactly.
that's
Yeah.
what markets want. They want to invest in something that is not going to blow away in a year or two, and hopefully that they have a long-term relationship with. And that's what you and I are trying to develop as well with our clients and with our members. We want to have a long-term relationship with this industry, and we want to help it mature and grow.
I think on that we can wrap. That was a beautiful wrap to our conversation, Maureen. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome. Thank you so much for your time,
Yeah,
Varsha.
thank
I,
you.
I really appreciate the conversation, and I look forward to continuing it hopefully soon in person.
Yes, we will look at our calendars for March. Anyone else who's listening, the fly-in is a great opportunity to build relationships with other producers and it's pretty remarkable the work that the team does to get us in front of legislators who have a say. So please prioritize it as well. And we'll hopefully see you all soon. Thank
Sounds
you.
great. Thanks, Varsha. Take care.
Bye.
Thank you, Emily, Emma, and Deirdre as well. Bye-bye.